Before we get started, I should mention that we did have a few people ask us like, hey, why can't we do Zoom calls instead of the webinar format? Because I miss chatting with other people and so forth. And it's just worth mentioning, we had to do that because of a security issue with Zoom. If you were here and you saw the photo bomb, yeah, the issue, it was not awesome. So we're working on it. We're going to try and develop our format, and we may do some changes to the weekly briefing in the near future to make sure that we get as many faces and people plugged in and part of the conversation. So we're aware of that. All right, so Tim, I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to spotlight myself and you so that we can get this started. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Okay, so what we're talking about today, Tim, this idea of taking risks, good risk versus bad risk. I guess I forgot to mention, this is the weekly briefing. I'm Joel, joined by Tim. Today is Thursday, July 14th. This is our 30-minute time of the week where we pause and say, hey, what's going on in the world? What do owners of studios and production companies and creative agencies need to know? Or what are people talking about? What's the current hot button issue? And Tim, what's the context for this one? Why are we talking about good risks, bad risks, and all that stuff?
You know, I feel like for the last couple of weeks, probably not necessarily intentionally, we've been talking about possible pattern we're seeing, a down cycle, having people understand, be conservative with their thought process. And, thinking that through, there's also a flip side of recognizing that there is a need and opportunity to take a risk sometimes. But risk can have a spectrum, can it? There can be very foolish things you do that you call risk, hoping that you get reward from it. Or there's actual calculated risk you can take with measurable results that you can get anticipated outcome out of it. So to talk through and recognize there's some difference of risk and actually the need and ability to have that risk. And maybe even going against that natural feeling we have of could I actually live someday without this panic that I feel every morning when I wake up?
Right. So let's give an anecdote or two, okay? Because maybe if you're watching us right now or the replay, you might relate to this. So I'm thinking of, there were a couple owners this past week that I was talking with. And I remember one of them saying something that I used to say back in my day. So Tim, you remember this? What's your sales goal, for example? And this owner was saying, I really want to try and get more clients on a retainer basis. And I used to say this all the time too, until I learned that was really me responding to a fear that I had. There was this underlying, well, there's uncertainty and I just wish that I had more security. And I'm hearing that more and more now because there's some projects being put on hold, they're being paused. People are starting to ask questions like, well, hey, are you guys at RevThink seeing a full-blown pattern? And we're saying, well, it's a hiccup. We don't know if it's a pattern, but it seems to be a hiccup. And people start looking for security and saying, hey, maybe my client will just guarantee me a certain amount of money. I'll go for that deal rather than the project by project thing that I'm used to. But I don't know that is necessarily a most healthy response, because we know that our ability to respond in the face of fear and still take on risk is part of what is the creative entrepreneur's genius. It's what ultimately creates value and obviously creates a return and so forth. So what's your take?
Well, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, the creative needs that aha moment, that standing on the edge kind of moment to have the muse show up and find that creative idea. But also the entrepreneur needs that, don't they? It's actually where the value proposition is. Hey, as you have problems, we are experts in our field and we can provide solutions that match your problems. Let's talk, let's engage. So to want to wipe away that moment is almost to wipe away what your edge is. And there is a false sense of, I'm not going to get into retainers completely, but there's a false sense of that retainers would solve a lot of problems. Right. And that's probably spoken by people that haven't really put retainers together, because retainers are really about a volume value proposition. I'll give you a lot of work the same work over and over and over again at a high volume, and you just keep on producing it. And by the way, you're gonna give me a discount because I'm giving you a $2 million contract over a 12-month period instead of releasing to you these big one-off propositions. So there's not necessarily a total gain when it comes to that retainer idea. Again, not to go on that tangent, but the thought of like, what are you really trying to avoid is the unknown, where a retainer feels like, oh, that's known. If I have a retainer, at least I know what I have to do next month.
Yeah. Well, remember there was an owner we met with it when we were doing the briefings in person in New York. And I was asking him, like, I know you guys have that big retainer. How's that going? And I said, no, how's it really going? Because I find that retainers over time all degenerate. They all degrade. And he was like, yeah, this one too. Same pattern. So here's a little story I'd love to share, because I can remember when I was going through some entrepreneurial coaching, I had my coach, Dan Sullivan, said something to me that really rattled my brain. And I really wish we were in this call mode where I could ask everybody to raise their hand and just say, hey, yeah, I can relate. Or I've had that same thought. And what I noticed was in the early years of my business, maybe year 5, 6, 7, 8, something, that I was always sort of just angsty. Like I was always nervous and uptight about how can I get the next job? How can I know the cash is going to be there? How can I don't know, get the next cool project, whatever that thing was. And it came from this place of fear. And what Dan told me was, hey, Joel, you know that fear that you feel, that's actually never going to go away. And I thought, that doesn't sound good. Like you're trying to, right? You're trying to encourage me or discourage me. And what he said was, no, you don't understand that the ideal place for you as an entrepreneur is to have equal parts fear and excitement at all times. Because if you have just excitement all the time, you get lazy, you stop learning, right? If you only have fear all the time, you're immobilized and you can't take action. But he said, your sweet spot, I want you to realize, is to always have equal parts of fear and excitement. And I asked him, so you mean I'm always going to have a certain portion of fear, even when I'm 15 people, when I'm 20-person company, when I'm a 30-person company? He said, yeah. And that's where you should be. That's where you want to be. And that rearranged my thinking so much, because I don't know, there was something that we said earlier, once we prepared for this, our call, right? When you were saying there's this certain posture that is the fundamental engine that drives your business, of stepping forward despite fear and taking on certain risks, even when things are uncertain, or maybe certainty is going down, but there's still this ability to step into risk.
Yeah. First of all, Dan's advice is really good. It's almost like you have to be comfortable with the feeling of discomfort. That's what the encouragement is like, yeah, it's always going to be there, but you'll feel more comfortable with it in the future. And there's something that we all know, is that last year we felt that fear, and yet we made it through last year. And 2 years ago, we had that fear, and we solved that problem 2 years ago. So why wouldn't we be able to solve that problem today for tomorrow? And you have skills, you have resources, you have clients, you have a greater understanding, you have people you can depend on, you have RevThink to keep on encouraging you. Whatever you have, that ability to solve the problem is also growing as the problem grows itself. So as your business gets bigger, as you probably witnessed, Joel, 25 people was more stressful and even more scary than 12 people. And 50 people was double that again. So the ability to take on more people feels very scary, feels very risky. And one of the first risks that people often ask is, should I hire somebody? Is this the right time to bring someone on? And it feels, and I remember that feeling too, of like, wow, when is the moment where I'm going to give up a piece of my salary to somebody else, and will I be able to pay my bills and keep them going?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I'm remembering my partner at the time, life partner, right? That whenever I would go and hire a person, she would say, oh, so we're not going to bring that money home anymore, right? So you've hired somebody $50,000 a year, so now we're going to make $50,000 less each year. And I'll just say that's a very human and normal reaction.
Sure does feel that way because I do the math and there's $50,000 to go. Yeah.
Right. Okay. But here's what happens. I think when we become afraid and there's less certainty, we start to go into zero sum thinking more. We think, oh, if I spend X, then X isn't around. So therefore all other things are going to stay the same, right? Zero sum. Therefore I'm taking a big pay cut. When in reality, of course, every person you hire should be an investment that's generating a return. So I'm spending 50, but it's going to generate 2, 3, 4 times that. But that equation, right? This is where maybe you can start to give us some of your thoughts, because I want to pick your brain on, if you were going to help these owners that we were talking to last week, the people here today, is there a framework, a way of thinking about risk, that all risks are not created equal, right? That some are good risks, some are bad risks, but where would we begin?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I guess for me, like when I think of the word, I want to differentiate between the difference of a wish and a risk, right?
Okay.
So when I think of risk, it's something that's calculable. For example, if you were to bring somebody on and cost them $50,000 a year and you can't calculate the results of that person, then you're right. It's $50,000 less you're taking home, because you're basically hoping, I wish that this person would bring in more money, or hope this person covers their own paycheck. Therefore, I can get out of it. That's not a good way of thinking about risk. Risk is something you'd say, no, I can think about this person. They're $50,000 a year. My capability grows by 500,000 in doing that. And I also I probably could take 10% of the $500,000 gain. My paycheck remains the same, and my ability or capability as a business has grown. You can actually calculate that. You can measure out what the results need to be. Who is this person? What role do they play? What are the costs for that person over a period of time? That's a calculated or calculable risk that you can take and know, is it a good one or a bad? Now, listen, when you calculate it and it's, there is a zero sum gain to having this person there because you've calculated it, and you're going to be negative 50,000. In that case, yeah, you're right. It's $50,000 less you're taking home. Like, you can calculate the result of that too. So that's the first differentiator. I want to be able to calculate the risk. I want to understand, what is it that I'm moving in towards? And risk meaning I don't necessarily control, as always, don't control all the outcome of it, but how much am I willing to commit into this problem using the current resources in order to see that result?
Right. So the other thing I'm thinking about is, well, I'm asking, what are some of the other, I don't know, call it levers, that we can push and pull on when we think about a risk? Like, maybe how does the risk play out over time?
Yeah, I think one of the first calculations, I think you're probably asking that, is like, hey, what are those calculations that I would be able to work against this risk? So one of the first things you have to ask is time. I think that's the greatest thing that works against money, is time. And so if I want to understand a return on investment, or if I'm understanding a risk of bringing somebody on, I have to ask myself a question: how long until this person pays for themselves?
Right.
And then how long until this person doubles their income, and so on. And then if I understand how long, then I understand how long I have to support this person off of, the reserve of the company or the company's corporate finances before I'm seeing that result. And so that time one's very important, and the commitment to that time is important. So I love time. The cash board allows us for that. I think one of the most eye-opening events for our clients is when they're asking, can I bring somebody on? They want to look at their annual budget. And I jump over to the cash board, because the first thing they think is, this person's $50,000 a year. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So if it's going to take 12 months for that person to bring any quality or value to your company, sure, it's 50 grand. But if it takes 12 months for that person to bring value to your company, you shouldn't bring on that person, because it should take about 3 to 6 months. So you're really looking at a $12,000 commitment to bring on a new person before that person starts generating revenue for your business. so much easier to understand than that overall salary paycheck. So that time qualifier is such a great qualifier to begin with, because that is the first one you can measure risk against.
I'm thinking of an example because I remember there was a motion design studio and the owner was asking me, hey, should we hire a rep? And I'm generally not a super big fan of that approach, but that aside, we ultimately decided to engage this person, but I said, look, let's do it on one condition, because this is a risk, right? It was a certain amount of retainer every month. And if we won jobs, we were going to pay a certain percentage. I said, let's just make the decision now whether or not we're going to keep the rep 180 days from now. Meaning, we're making the decision now called at 180 days, we either see this result and this continues, or we see some other result and it doesn't. So we pre-made the decision of whether or not the risk, right, whether or not the risk was paying off. So that as it played out, when that day came, I remember the owner just sending an email to the rep and saying, hey, we had this goal, as you know, and we haven't met it. So thank you for your efforts.
Exactly
goodbye.
right.
It was a zero. There was no emotion to it. Nobody lost any sleep over it. And I look back on that and I think, gosh, I guess I wish I would have done that more myself back in my day. Of when you look at something like a cash board, right? You can say, you could see 12 weeks or more of decision points, and you can sort of make the decision now rather than, oh no, it's right here and I can't afford this and I'm scared and I'm not sure what to do. Like, make the decision now.
Yeah, with the tool that you're kicking in is expiration date. Put an expiration date on some things. It's very important. And
Right.
specifically what you're working against there is your sunk cost bias, where that if you don't have the expiration date, you're always thinking, well, I paid 40 grand already. Maybe now will be the magic month that person will come in. But if you put the expiration date up front, then you're working towards that deadline. You're actually measuring actual results against that expense and determining, is it worth it? Because what else you're missing when you're not making that decision is the opportunity to bring someone else on in the same time. You have someone that's not performing versus someone that could possibly perform, and that loss there is huge when you're working against yourself that way. So expiration dates are really, really great as a calculable result or return on your risk investment.
Here's another simple concept that someone impressed upon me in this, what did you call it? Loss aversion bias?
Yeah, your sunk cost bias.
Sunk cost bias is a coin flip. So, right. So if you think of your salesperson as, oh, I'm going to give them a certain amount of time, you think, well, they're eventually going to hit. But you realize today, when it's been 180 days, whether or not that person succeeds today, right? The rep brings in a job, it's still a coin flip. And every time you flip a coin, it's just 50-50. It doesn't matter if you flipped it 100 times before that and it came up heads every time. The odds are no greater or less the next time you flip it that it will be tails. It's just 50-50. So you have to sort of let go of that bias, I think, in these kinds of decisions. Otherwise, yeah, you think, but I've invested so much. If I have to let go of all those heads because I never got the tails, I've lost something. It's like, no, it's really not a loss. You invested it. It's gone. Now make a decision moving forward.
But so when we often talk about this in theory, what people can't hear us understanding too is that, you're sharing this expiration date, or you're giving the parameters to the person you're working with also. You're saying with them, hey, let's work on this together. Let's partner on this problem together. If I'm bringing on a new creative director, you say, I'm bringing you on, I'll pay you $200,000 a year, but I'm expecting $2 million in additional revenue in the company. So let's work on that problem together, and you be part of the sales meeting. You be part of the direction and marketing that we're putting out there. And I will sit in with you while you're doing your pitches to see if anything I can do to help you win. So you're not just leaving that person alone and going, well, okay, well, hope you win. Like, no, you are part of that equation and have an influence over that equation to make sure it's successful as well. So who you are is, and how much time and ability you have to contribute. I found it interesting that somebody recently asked me to invest in something that it was like helicopters or something. And they gave me the numbers, and the numbers of the investment were amazing. They were great. It's probably a really good investment for somebody. The problem I have is I don't know anything about helicopters. So when the time comes and there's a problem, I'd be like, what was I supposed to do to fix that investment or get a better return? Not that the history was going to be wrong, but if I'm going to repeat the history, I have to understand and analyze what's going on there. Bad investment for me, bad understanding. But if someone were to come to me and say, "Here's a production company," I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I can look at the numbers day and night, right? I can even understand what the growth opportunities are." Well, anybody at your company, any job that you have, no matter what size you are, you would often understand what that person's role would be. If I bring on a salesperson, I often understand what that role is and what role I play in making that successful. And my ability and time and knowledge is part of that calculation. So that idea, I call that the opportunity part of the calculation. What opportunity is this for me to leverage my knowledge, my experience into this equation so that it gets those right results? And if I have opportunity to influence it, it's a greater opportunity for me than if I have no idea of how. I mean, I love helicopters. I'd take a flight in one, but please don't ask me to invest.
You stole the word I was going to mention, which is influence, right? That idea that there are certain risks that you can manage and influence, right? Like my dad always taught me, Joel, other people are really good at losing your money. Right? Because when I would say, hey, I have some extra money, should I invest in this or that and the other? And he would say, well, let me ask you, if I was going to take that amount of money and invest it in your business, what would you do? And my answer was always something like, well, I'd go hire that creative director, to use your example. And he would say, then that's what you should do with your money. Because you know your business, you know how to get a return on that. And it was like, oh, right. I mean, I can take $50,000 and hire somebody amazing and figure it out as I go. I'll find the 200,000 to pay them over the year, right? Because we're going to go create opportunity and create value. But it is risky, but it's a pretty good risk. I figured out how to play that game.
And I know that opportunity that you had there, and I know you got gigantic returns from that aha moment, because by bringing on that creative person and getting out of your own way, wondering when is the right time, you realize, wait a second, this is how investment works, and you get that ROI. Your creative team absolutely expands and you grow. So I love that. You are part of this. You don't have to, have all the answers, but you are an influence and a piece of that. One last one that I have is you need to educate yourself in this process as well, and be willing to lean in and learn more along the way, because all risks have some ability to qualify that return. So what I mean by that is if I was looking for a new producer, there's probably 2 or 3 candidates I would look at. How do I understand which one is the right candidate? Or honestly, here's the last choice too. Or after meeting these 3 candidates, should I still do this or not? So how do I qualify the problem I have and this person or this position as the solution? And I have to have some form of understanding of what the job is, how that person would respond to that job, the results I'm going to get from that person, and understand if that person's qualified to do it. And I'll say more specifically, qualified to do it at my company, because they can be very successful somewhere else and come into your business, and for some reason not successful. So right. I think over time we know that more and more, and we become way more comfortable with bringing people on, because we start to learn who we are better. And so anytime we meet somebody, there's been moments where I've met somebody, I didn't have a position open, but I met them, I realized, oh, you are a unique individual. We need to capture you and bring you on board right now. I'll figure out the job later, but I don't want to lose you because I know you'd be a perfect fit for our group. I think that qualifier is a huge one that we often, think of, like we know it exists, but we don't know how to really put that into that nutshell of risk reward.
So I got a really nice text from our client, Jared here, who was saying, hey, another good piece of advice that you and Tim gave me back in the day was to pay myself first. And I was thinking that's always a good investment, right? Because a bad risk is when you say, I'm going to take the money that I would normally pay myself and I'm going to put it over here and over here and over here, right? Because you're potentially killing the golden goose in that situation. And I'm thinking about protecting that, and just, again, finding a way to still manage your risk and make those investments that move you forward, but protect that. What are your thoughts?
Well, the pay yourself first mentality is to say this: one, you're providing value for the business, and the clients need to pay for that as well. So when you discount yourself, you're basically giving your client away free value, and we don't want that. So that's one basis. But the other one is this: is when you pay yourself first, you're actually making sure that you want to go to work every day, that there's a good ROI here, and it's a measuring stick that other people understand success. If the most successful person in this business has to give up their paycheck twice a year to keep the business going, that's not a good measure of success. But if you can create a measure of success that says, hey, I'm able to increase the business and increase the results of the business for myself personally, then other people understand, oh, this is a secure place to work. There's a future for me here. And you personally understand how to reward somebody that provides that kind of value. So you can pay someone more than you. That's fine. You can be an executive producer and hire a creative director for your business that gets paid more. That happens all the time. Sales reps sometimes can make more than the owner of a company. I think that's amazing. That's a great value proposition that would be an awesome ROI to measure and know that you're going to get there. But to pay yourself first just means it's your business. You're going to go to work there every day. Let's make sure that base is covered.
As we say, your first job in business is to stay in business. So that's right. That's investing in that. Here's another thought I'm just thinking about, Tim. We owe it, I think, to everyone here to mention this, because every time we say this, there's always someone that says, I'm so glad you said that. And it's this idea of, as an owner, I know this because I lived it. Tim, you've lived it. When you go to hire somebody, you really want to hire them and it work out for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. Like you really do want to give them a career. You want to give them opportunity. You want them to succeed. The thought of hiring somebody only to have to let them go 90 or 180 days later is so painful and so uncomfortable that many people just stop. And we want to give everyone here permission that it's okay. Sometimes you move forward. Of course, you're open, you're candid with people. Like you said, you're hiring a creative director. You said, look, here's our goal. This is what we're going to go after. And I have this dream. I think you want to be a part of it. Let's try and make this happen. If it doesn't work out, then it won't work out. It's okay, right? You're doing your best. You're moving forward despite ambiguity, uncertainty. But it is, at the end of the day, you're taking a risk, and the person has to be okay with that. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. You're not a bad person.
Yeah, not only is it okay, and I kind of mean this in that very Tim way, but like, just imagine the ego that you have, that you think you can provide for someone's entire life, for their whole life. So that job is their career. That's almost the fool kind of thinking of like, oh, my job is to make sure the person I bring on has a continual promise forever, as long as they want to be here. That's actually not the commitment you want to make at all. The commitment you want to make to people that come into your sphere of influence is that they're going to have a successful career because they knew you or know you or will know you. And so so like that ability to walk into somebody, have them be part of your sphere of influence, work with them, help them succeed, even if it's just for a temporary job, or if it does last a decade, that there was opportunities that they gained and blew up because you're around. So I love that kind of thinking way more. And there are moments where you say, you will be so much more successful if you left my business right now, because I can only provide to you X and you have greater potential, or you're suffering here because you can't keep up with us. You need to go find a place that's a better fit for you. All of those are better career moves for that person.
Wow. That's brilliant. I'm thinking of that moment when I had to do my first fire, right? When I had to let my first person go. And I remember it was a buddy I was climbing a mountain with, and he was like, Joel, how arrogant of you, because for all you know, you're holding that person back. Mm-hmm. They're ready to go on to their next thing and thrive and succeed. But you foolishly or optimistically, whatever, think, oh, but it should all work out. It should all be great. She should be able to work here forever. And it's all like, he said, that's pretty arrogant. Like maybe, and he was right, because after I let her go, she went on and was much more successful.
Yeah.
It ran its course. It was okay.
Yeah, it does run its course. Or we make mistakes, or situations change. Situations can change in people's lives in 24 hours. So there's a reality to what you're working on. So you don't want to take, if people for granted. You don't want to grab them without any long-term thought or concern. But we know who you are. If you're a follower of RevThink, we know who you are. You are a conscious-minded, loving individual that cares about people's life, career, and business, right? So that's where you belong. And how do we do that? And how do we kind of work with that in community? We take care of those around us, even if it's for a very short amount of time.
So I love what Dallas shared. I literally have a new producer starting on Monday, and you're speaking straight to my subconscious. Thank you, Dallas. That's a good share. Well, Tim, we should wrap it up. I hope everyone here has gotten an encouragement, right, to evaluate risks. Know there's good ones, know there's bad ones, and especially those good ones. They're still scary. They always will be. But guess what? That's the job, right, Tim?
That's exactly the job. And just so you know, you're not doing this alone. You can join us in community and be part of the conversation there. There are other business owners that are processing this well. Use each other, talk to each other, encourage each other. Please be available for each other. And you always have us, because we exist so that you can thrive in your business, in your life, in your career. So thank you for joining us. We do love you all, and we wish you the best.
And Dallas, we were talking about you just this morning because we were like, hey, we got to put that event on. And we know at least one person will show up. If we do a dinner, Dallas will be there.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next week, or we'll see you in the community between now and then. Cheers.
Bye.